Hello and welcome to the Tech Remedy Podcast. I'm Jamie and I'm passionate about seeing businesses win using technology. In each episode, we'll talk to industry experts or business owners just like you. We'll uncover how technology has been used in the real world. Don't forget to subscribe and follow me on LinkedIn for more insight and content to come. Today I'm joined by Phil from Coalition, who provides cyber insurance, and you're one of the development underwriters, I think, for Coalition.
That's right, yes. Yeah, good to see you.
We were talking a little bit before the episode started, and I think one of the reasons I wanted to get you on as a guest and have this chat would be to help people understand why cyber insurance might be needed, and it not necessarily be the evil that some people might think from the reputation it might have. So we'll kind of dig into that a little bit as we go, but can you start by giving me a little bit of an overview about your role and what you currently do in your day-to-day?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a development underwriter at Coalition. So an underwriter is basically a specialist within the insurance industry. So the job that I have is to assess businesses and companies. So we look at things like security controls. We look at static data as well, like turnover, business description, size. We basically see what the chances of you having a loss would be, and then we try and offset that in terms of appropriate premiums and retentions and things like that. So really, we're looking at data available to us to make a decision on what the insurance contract should look like.
And Coalition just specialise in the cyber insurance kind of field rather than being a big kit for everything style insurance.
Exactly, yeah. So cyber is the only line of business that we do. So we specialise in that. That's all we're focused on. We like to think we're pretty good at it. And given the fact that we're a fairly new a new insurance provider in the UK, it's given us an opportunity to actually start from scratch. Build systems, processes, exactly how they should be to be the most efficient, to offer the best product, to offer the best service as well. And everything that we do is kind of rooted in technology as well. So, in addition to the insurance product, we also develop our own scanning tools. We have our own threat research team that then tune those scanning tools, so we can make sure that we're being really, really targeted and really specific in terms of certain vulnerabilities and technologies that companies have exposure to that they might not even know themselves. So we're sharing that information back with them, and the whole point is, this active insurance proposition. So we look at what the current threat trends are. We then see if there's any kind of correlation between those threat trends and actual economic loss at the end of the chain, and then how can we actually help our customers, help our policyholders mitigate against those risks. So actually, when we put all this together, we actually have far fewer claims than all of our competitors, because we're seeing these events before they happen, which up until now has been one of the big downfalls of traditional insurance, which is very good at responding to events but can't necessarily predict what's coming next. So the active insurance proposition is looks to
it's a forward-thinking way of looking at technology, insurance and stuff like that. And I think we were talking before off camera a little bit, and traditional insurance, like, not set and forget, that's probably the wrong term, but when you'd go out and you'd insure a car and then you don't see anything happen until the next year and then you keep going, that's not the model, or that's not how cyber insurance should work, is it? And I think some of the negativity around insurance is around they're just out to give me a protection, but when it goes wrong, I'm on my own, or my premiums are going to go up. And I think I've been through this process with a client, and it's actually not like that at all. That you working in alignment to share a common goal of not being breached or hacked in the first place, aren't you? Which I guess is like you're adaptive and the data you're feeding back. But then also, if something does happen, you're mitigating that risk pretty quickly, and it's not all about leaving people out.
Yeah, exactly. So I suppose, if we're looking at assessing risk based on controls only, proposal form comes in and we look at what controls you have and don't have. At that point, the insurance underwriters and brokers can then make suggestions to actually, we've seen lots of claims come from the absence of certain controls. So multi-factor authentication was a big one a couple of years ago. Lots of companies didn't have MFA in place, particularly when going to remote working due to COVID. we saw an increase in ransomware events because of the lack of MFA. So the controls kind of follow suit. So the insurance industry can be really good in terms of structuring and shaping the controls and security to prevent claims happening. What we do at Coalition is sort of go one step further, and we look at actually specific vulnerabilities within certain technologies. So whether that's Microsoft or Cisco or Fortinet, which of these vulnerabilities are actually causing large losses, and then absolutely. So as and when claims do happen, and these things do occur, regardless of size of company or where you're located or how much you're spending on security. Events do happen, and that's where the insurance policy really kicks in with, breach response support, so forensic investigation, breach counsel, so advice on do you need to notify to regulators, to the ICO territory, if you're operating in different territories worldwide, making sure you're getting the right advice and the right support to be able to respond to that incident.
So in terms of how long's Coalition been running now? How long have you?
So we've been going just over 8 years in the US,
Okay.
And then 3 years in the UK.
Yeah.
So,
and your approach then to cyber insurance and how it's maybe changed from day one to now, and what does that look like in terms of like some of the stuff you do now, but maybe you didn't do initially, or how is that landscape changing?
So really, it's in terms of using the tools that are available to us, and let's take our active insurance model. So we rely very heavily on our own scanning tools. Now, lots of insurers are using third-party scanning tools, sort of just external for external scanning and looking at things like CVEs and potentially open ports. But they're going to be very general. They're not going to be specifically looking for what are the key things that are actually causing losses. So the tools that we're using and the scanning tools that we developed is based on our own research. A lot of it, we've got our own honeypot network, including honeypots in the UK. So we can sort of keep an eye on hacker chat as well, on dark web forums and things like that. So we've got a really good idea in terms of what threat actors are looking for, the tactics, the tools, the systems that they're trying to exploit, and then just try to stay one step ahead and make sure, if we can see threat actors looking for a certain vulnerability, making sure that we then make sure our policyholders are aware of that vulnerability, making sure they're properly patched in time, and then if anything does happen, we can be really quick off the mark in terms of response. So really, this is kind of where we've combined security tools with the insurance proposition to be proactive in terms of preventing claims happening, rather than, as I said, the traditional insurance model, which has been very reactive. If a claim happens, that's when everything kicks in. But really, this way we can actually prevent the claims happening in the first place, at least to the policyholders that are using our tools. Yeah,
so you kind of move into a little bit more of a partnership rather than just being a service vendor and selling something. And it's two-way. You're going to communicate things, and it's not, I used the term set and forget earlier, but in the adaptive world, you're constantly looking to improve and align and help people.
Absolutely. I mean, the insurance contract has always been a partnership in the sense that it's there to help put you back to the position you were in before the loss, and insurers in all lines of business do help with things like risk management and risk advice, and how do we improve kind of how we approach, view, manage risk exposure. But I suppose this way it does allow us to be more proactive than we were before, and we always share results of our scans. So every single policyholder, every single quote that we give, will share our cyber risk assessment. So we'll give details of exactly what we've looked for, which domains have been scanned, if there are any issues, what DNS record they come from, what domains are they actually linked to. And then also with advice in terms of why we think it's a bad thing, and also how to then resolve it in usually 3 to 4 fairly easy to follow bullet points.
So on that then, because I know people will be asking about this, that report I guess gives a red line of we can't support you without these things being in place, or does it say we can do it but you're high risk because of X? And if that's the case, if they remediate those things, does the quote go down, or is it not as
a bit of both? So good security is rewarded, and over time, if we can see an improvement in the risk score, then that does also feed into our underwriting model. So almost in real time, they'll see either premium benefit or sometimes premium loading, depending on certain technologies that we find. And we're always very open in terms of what we think is bad and what we think is good. And I suppose to answer your other question there in terms of will we ever decline a risk based on these technologies? Very rarely do we do that.
Okay.
So we're fairly agnostic in terms of business description, turnover sizes. We can do pretty much everything. But if there are critical technologies or critical vulnerabilities that remain open that we can see, we also know that threat actors are looking for these specific vulnerabilities. We know that they're exploiting these vulnerabilities. So we want them simply just to be fixed prior to going on cover.
Okay.
And they're normally fairly easy things. If there's a web panel exposed, just make sure it's got MFA applied to it or put it behind the firewall or something like that. So they're fairly quick, simple fixes. And we do tend to see the kind of the same suspects cropping up again and again with new vulnerabilities that have been discovered. So we want to make sure that we're staying on top of those. So it's really about feeding back the information and taking tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of known vulnerabilities and boiling it down to maybe about 15 or 20 that we know are going to be really these are the ones you need to be really cautious of, and these are going to lead to the large attacks later on.
So can you tell me then, so to kind of continuing on from there, about some people's maybe misconceived ideas about cyber insurance and some of the questions? I know, again, we were talking about this before, but some of the communities that we're part of, insurance gets a bad rep, and especially even with other IT business owners, people are not necessarily aligned to, well, it's going to be in our favour to make sure stuff's done right or X, Y, and Z. It's a case of you need it, but when shit hits the fan, they're just going to cover their own backs, is some of the mentality that I've seen. So can you kind of share some of them, maybe misconceptions or stuff? And
I suppose one of the most obvious ones would be if you've got insurance in place, then you don't necessarily need to invest in security. Or the other way around as well is probably more what we see. Okay, I've got really good security, therefore I don't need cyber insurance. Which is, let's take any other line of insurance. If you're going to insure your house, for instance, if you're going to insure a building, if you're going to insure these things against fire, flood, theft, insurers want to see that you've got sprinklers, they've got fire alarms, maybe CCTV cameras, you've got good locks on the windows. These are the things that make you insurable, and it's in everyone's interest not to have a claim. But the insurance is always there as a safety net. So within the context of cyber insurance, there are certain minimum controls that we like to see in place. So multi-factor authentication is one. We like to see good backup policies, possibly firewalls, encryption, those sorts of things. And if you've got these in place, then you are less likely to have an incident, but you're never going to prevent everything all at once. And actually, I think a lot of the IT directors and CISOs and business owners that we work with have started to appreciate that, just like any other line of insurance, it's there as a safety net when these things do eventually go wrong. And actually, the vast majority of claims that we pay actually come from phishing, social engineering. So it's the human vulnerability there. So regardless of how good your security is, there's always going to be a way in for threat actors using the human vulnerability there.
So on that then, because that's probably a really good point, do you guys... is there any not mandate as such, but recommendations around training and that sort of stuff for staff, or do you guys kind of stay more on the technical infrastructure side than?
In terms of recommendations, absolutely, it's something we would recommend all businesses do. So yes, 79% of the claims that we pay at the moment originate from social engineering or phishing.
Right, okay.
So whether that's business email compromise or ransomware or financial crime, theft of money, they're originating from the human kind of vulnerability. So yeah, absolutely, staff training is something we would recommend. We do provide that via our coalition control platform. So we'll give staff training, and phishing simulations would be included in that as well. So that would be an additional cost, but it's something that we provide. In terms of mandating for the insurance policy, for most SMEs, we don't insist on it.
Yeah.
It's obviously there as a recommendation, but we do try and keep things as easy as possible in terms of the security features that we see. And as I say, we rely very heavily on our scanning tools, our external scan, that we can see if there are any critical vulnerabilities that are more likely to lead to a loss. So we tend to focus on that and then make the insurance transaction much easier for those businesses.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think definitely people are guilty of just applying more technology to a situation rather than doing some of the fundamentals around staff training sometimes, aren't they? And we still see it today, like the amount of people with stuff like MFA that has been around forever that are hesitant to have it put on a personal phone sometimes if it's not company owned.
Yeah.
And just not understanding the benefit of having it, or even like they'll have it on work systems that are mandated, but then they might not have it on their own like LinkedIn profiles, for example, or other stuff in it. It should be a fundamental thing that you have set up on every app now, isn't it? That sort of stuff.
Well, yes, and I think this is the age-old thing of cyber security and internet security. You know, there's always going to be a trade-off between the best security, which is what the IT team want, versus business processes, which maybe the FD and the business owner. So there's potentially a bit of
there's a scale of. We said this all the time. The more policy and friction you put in, the less likely somebody is to do something. But at the same time, the more policy and friction you put in, the more secure something can be. And what we sort of say to clients is, if we look at that scale, it's our job to educate you on the possibilities, and it's your job to understand where you want to live on that.
Yeah, there's a bit of a business decision to be made in terms of how much investment you put in, and how easy do you want to make it for staff. But also keep in mind that these tools, these security features, they do prevent attacks happening. So I think it just comes down to the business appetite for risk, as we were saying at the beginning, in terms of understanding what your exposure is to a cyber event, and then what decisions do you take from there? Do you transfer to the insurance market? Do you retain it on your own balance sheet and try to manage? So there's always going to be a trade-off, I think, in terms of how much do we actually spend on security and how many controls do we put in place. But certainly there are some really quick, easy wins in there as well. And staff training is a really good example of that.
Just on that then, and social engineering, AI is obviously a big topic of any tech conversation. Have you seen anything AI related that, obviously we're looking at deep fakes and you can clone voices and even avatars of people like that now? Is there anything like that you've seen, or is that not really come to the forefront yet?
There was one large well-publicised crime incident where somebody used, they were on a Teams call with 6 or 7 other individuals that all turned out to be deep fakes.
Right, okay.
In terms of, the more sort of routine type of claims that we're responding to, there's a couple of things here. So social engineering, as I said, was the largest cause of loss. Now, one of the key flags that used to be for social engineering and phishing emails would be grammatical errors, spelling mistakes. This doesn't quite feel right. So obviously, with the use of AI, those things have basically become null and void. So the phishing emails are getting much better. Calls are getting much better. In terms of actually using things like avatars and deep fake videos, my understanding is that they are quite expensive to do, and you would need to be quite targeted in it. So maybe for the one-off large theft, then maybe that would pay off. But really, it's just the more routine ones in terms of sending emails to somebody within the business that has the authority to transfer money out. We are also seeing AI being used by threat groups to develop code. Obviously, you can't do it on ChatGPT, but there are alternative versions of those large language models that can actually write malicious code for you. So actually, the route to market for threat actors has become much easier. Either ransomware for hire, ransomware as a service, or using large language models to develop that code, which you can then execute with very little training yourself. So it is something that's coming more and more, and we actually do have an affirmative AI endorsement. So if there is an incident that was caused by AI, our policy does affirmatively cover that.
All right, okay. I suppose that's something that's quite new and you've had to adapt to recently with the change in the world and how AI has been utilised as well.
Yeah, exactly. And just looking forward to the next sort of round of risks and what exposures are we going to have to focus on, and make sure we stay at the forefront of that.
Yeah, I did. Speaking of obviously like the emails getting better and stuff like that, I did have a client probably like 6 months ago. She had a conveyancing business, and somebody had kind of spoofed her email and everything and sent it to the accounts department and said, "Can you transfer this money out to X, Y, Y?"
Yeah.
And the only reason it got stopped, one of the main reasons, were the email was too friendly and nice, the tone.
Okay.
And the director was normally more blunt.
Right.
So the actual accounts person got alerted to it, not because it had mistakes in it or anything like that, but because the tone was just too happy and cheery for what she would normally receive from a director.
But these are exactly the sorts of things that you need to be, looking out for. Is, does the tone match? And actually, quite a lot of the time we see that there has been some sort of business email compromise within this as well. So, the threat groups are actually really good at this, and they'll sit there and they'll watch the correspondence between the individuals, and they'll make sure they're matching the tone and the inflection and, how they sign off. Do they say kind regards or best regards, and they'll make sure they match that. And they also know, when you're likely to pay a large invoice or when you've got a large invoice due from a customer, and they'll make sure that they're intercepting at just the right time because they've done their research, they've sat there, they've been patient. And we're seeing it all the time. And we actually had an incident towards the end of last year. UK law firm, two senior directors, I think the FD and a senior partner, were duped into giving access to their bank account to a threat actor, and they transferred £1.4 million to various banks across Europe. But again, this is where the insurance policy can really help out. So they alerted our claims team. Our claims team then put into action what we call our clawback service, where we work with financial crime lawyers and the banks themselves to track the money through the banking system, freeze the accounts, and then have the right leverage to actually able to grab all that money back. So they'd transferred £1.4 million, and then we'd actually helped them to get all of that money back.
All right, that's
from the banking system, which you need to be really fast and really lucky, but we are the only insurer in the UK that can actually do that at the moment. So that's another thing when we're talking about things like business interruption and recovery costs and breach response. I think what clients sort of overlook is actually the day-to-day fraud and the day-to-day theft is going to be sometimes small sums of money, 10, 20,000 pounds, other times, much larger sums, up into the millions. And these kind of things do happen, and cyber insurance can be there to help put things right if they do.
And in terms of that, then, I think I'm right in saying that you might have some sort of media PR agencies as well that can help if there is a breach. And let's say it's not about the financial loss, but a loss of trust in a brand. You can help with that initial PR response as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's contained within the breach response cost. So the breach response is there, sort of think of it as a cyber 999. If you had a theft, you'd call the police. If there was a fire, you'd call the fire brigade. If you wake up in the morning and all your systems are down and you can't get on and you've got a ransom note on your screens, that's when you would call the cyber, the cyber insurance policy. And our claims team are really good at dealing with this day in, day out. And we've got specialist vendors on hand. So for forensic investigation, incident response, you want to find out who's got in, how far they've got. Breach counsel, do we need to notify regulators? And then contained within that, absolutely, PR support, PR specialists to help you with your communications. And this is going to be, the outside world. How do we communicate with customers? How do we communicate with the regulator? But also, how do we communicate with staff as well? It's going to be a really stressful time for staff. How much do we tell them? Do we want to tell them everything all at once and be open? Or do we kind of maybe keep things within a circle of trust? And in the first instance, what we don't want is to start spreading rumours and things out into the media as well. And it's always going to come down to, what is the media interest in this particular event? We do see these happening all the time. The ones that grab the news headlines are always going to be the large multinationals, multi-billion pound businesses. But what we are seeing day in, day out is a lot of smaller entities as well. So that's not to say that they wouldn't need PR support as well, in terms of how they communicate with their staff, their customers, their vendors, etc.
Yeah, I think people just sometimes take it at face value, don't they? If we've lost X and Y, then this is going to help us get back. But I have been through this process once. I mentioned obviously off camera, and it really surprised me the extra support around the non-technical bits and like the amount of again notifying whether to notify your governing bodies and that sort of stuff was something I didn't really expect them to come back and have a calculated response. I just expected it to be cover your back. You need to tell people, but it was a well thought out, like educated chat and decision. It wasn't just a
and actually having, going through the process of buying a cyber insurance policy does put you in a better position than if you weren't going to do that. I would say to any business that decides that the insurance policy is not right for them or they don't want to buy it for whatever reason, have a plan in place. Put together an incident response plan. Make sure you know who you're going to call for forensic investigation, incident response, who is going to support you with breach counsel. If it is ransomware we're dealing with, then you want to make sure you've got threat actor engagement and a qualified negotiator, because quite often we can negotiate that initial extortion demand down by quite a lot. In some cases, more than half or 2/3 of what it was originally. So all these things are going to save you money in the long run, rather than paying the ransom up front in terms of what they demanded. Let's try and look at other ways that we can recover the network. If we do need to pay the ransom, maybe let's try and pay a smaller proportion of what they were going to do anyway. So all of these things are ultimately saving the business quite a lot of money if anything does happen. So make sure you've got all these relationships in place. What you don't want to be doing is going through your procurement process while the house is on fire. So have a breach counsel on retainer, have a forensic investigator on retainer. Make sure you've thought about which other specialists, in terms of PR or call center or credit monitoring, that you might want to use.
So in terms of then, this is probably a good place to, theoretically we've been hacked. Time is obviously a critical sort of ingredient for success, I guess. What's my step? If I've been hacked right now, we're working with Coalition. I obviously want to get on a call and inform you guys as soon as possible. But what do then the next 2 hours, 10 hours, 2 days, 10 days? What's the time scale and what do things generally look like?
Okay, so absolutely. Time is of the essence. So as soon as you can, call Coalition Claims Hotline. Our claims team will then look to, as soon as possible. So our average response time at the moment is around 5 minutes.
Okay.
We'll then be in touch with you, the business. Our policy holder will include your IT providers if they need to be on the calls as well. Anyone else that you want to be involved in that initial sort of fact finding stage, but we need to know who's got in the system, exactly what's happened, how far they've got, and then we can start sort of planning what the response would be and which appropriate vendors are going to be there to help out. So if there's a potential for some sort of data breach or compromise, then we need to make sure that we've got appropriate lawyers in place. If it's a case of business email compromise, then potentially we can contain that within just the forensic investigation costs. So really it's about finding out what's happened and then making a decision alongside the policyholder, alongside the IT team, and alongside the professionals that deal with these sorts of things day in, day out. So average response time would be about 5 minutes, and then from there it really depends in terms of where we go from there. Some incidences are obviously much more complicated to deal with, and they can go on for 3, 4, 5 days for the investigation. And it's only then that we can start to sort of think about recovery and restoring. Once we've actually ended the incident, others are going to be much more easily rectified. But we do also have a pre-breach hotline. So even if there's we're not quite sure if this is an actual claim. We're not quite sure. Let's say you've left a laptop on a train, or you've sent a sensitive data set to the wrong person, or one of your vendors has been breached and you're getting some suspicious emails. We're not quite sure if it's an incident or not. Call the pre-breach hotline. It's not going to be notified on the policy, and then at least you can get the right advice, the right support from professionals to make sure that you are taking the right steps to mitigate any future potential loss.
I think that's like something really good to point out, because as I mentioned, I think there's sometimes a real negative, we don't want to tell them because it's going to come back and hurt us. But in reality, you want to be aligned and you're working together. So this is something, the quicker you do it, the more you can make a joint decision, and having the access to that advice before you even get to the point of making a formal like breach notice is something that people should be aware of. Like your allies, you're there to work towards a common goal for the business. So you should be volunteering the information as soon as you can.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, more than half of claims we can actually contain within the breach response costs. So within the forensic investigation costs, which isn't going to cost the insured any money. Certainly if they use our own incident response company, Coalition Incident Response, we don't apply a retention there, and they get a separate ring fence limit for breach response. So it's not going to erode their main aggregate limit. They don't need to pay a retention. And actually, the quicker we can respond to these things, the more likely it is that we can actually close it with relatively lower cost than otherwise. So the faster we can respond, the more we're going to have a better result in the long run.
In terms of then, let's say a breach has happened, we've been through and we've contained it, but there's been a cost. When the policy comes up for renewal, is it like car insurance? I've crashed and written off my car, my insurance premium now goes up, or is it not? Someone did tell me, and this might not be true, so call me out on it if it's not. But if, let's say there's a vulnerability and we get caught and breached by it, but as part of that breach incident, we remediate it so it can't happen in the future, that it doesn't as negatively affect increasing insurance premiums? I don't know if that's true.
It does depend on the breach.
Okay.
And it does depend on the total cost. If an insurer's paid out millions, then I think you might expect certain costs to be increased at renewal. But on the other hand, following a breach can be a really good time to start looking at insurance. I'd always say that actually following an incident is when there's most attention on the network. That's when the IT team get the most investment in terms of security and budget to spend on things like additional controls, which are only going to be good. Certainly in terms of if the breach is serious enough, when our investigation teams go in, we do sort of put in EDR tools and MDR tools as an additional monitoring feature, which is obviously again going to be a good feature going forwards in terms of making sure the same event doesn't happen twice. But it really comes down to, let's do the investigation properly. Let's make sure we're finding out exactly what's happened and who's got in and how they've got in, and we're going to make sure they're not going to do that again.
And is there any? I imagine, and again, I might be wrong on this, car insurance, if you've had a claim, you have to notify people, or like having points on your license, there's a central system where you can see that. In the cyber insurance world, if you get a new prospect coming to you and they don't necessarily divulge what's happened in the past, is there a way that you guys can see that sort of stuff? Or is it more you judge it on the case of what you know there and then?
It's based on trust, and it's based on fair representation of the risk.
Okay.
So we do ask questions if you have had a claim within the last 3 years, I think it is. So obviously, if there has been a claim or an incident, or there has been a loss as a result of a cyber incident that would have been covered, then businesses would have a duty to disclose that.
Okay, that makes sense. So in terms of, we kind of covered that sort of stuff. Can you give some advice to obviously companies that might be listening to this right now, then, that either just sign a yearly renewal for cyber insurance and don't really take too much notice about what it may or not include? Or even companies that are just starting out and don't really know where to turn to? What would your advice be to get started with finding the right policies and the right provider?
So in terms of finding the right policy, certainly speak to your broker. There's lots of policies out there, some better than others. In terms of a starting point for companies that don't currently buy cyber insurance, I would say start with looking at what technologies you're using as a business. So if you're going to insure a house, you want to make sure you're going to look at what's the rebuild value of the house, what's the value of the contents inside, what's the potential maximum loss of all the things that could go wrong. So we want to be doing something similar from a cyber insurance perspective, which is probably going to start with what technologies are you reliant upon as a business. So this could be something as simple as emails. Do we send emails back and forwards to customers, suppliers, to take orders, to place orders for other stock in terms of logistics and getting things from A to B? Emails is going to be a really good starting point. You've then got, HR, payroll, invoicing systems that, ensure your back office and your day-to-day is running. And then you've also got sort of industry-specific software as well. And depending on the type of business, the type of company, these are going to sort of change depending on what you're doing. But almost all businesses are using some sort of software. But now, whether this is your own in-house products, or it could be software as a service or platform as a service provided by a third party. If you're using these tools, they're probably making your business more efficient or generating revenue in some way or other. So in the absence of these tools, let's say one or all of these technologies are unavailable to you.
Yeah.
How long is that going to last? How long is the outage going to be, and what's that going to cost you? So that's a really good starting point in terms of calculating business interruption loss.
Yeah.
If you've got a piece of business critical software and you don't have access to that for 2 weeks, what's that going to cost you as a business? And then, think about all the additional costs in terms of the investigation costs, breach counsel. I suppose one of the major unknowns is, what is the ransom demand going to be, and are we going to have to pay that? Are we going to have to negotiate down? But these are some of the things I'd encourage businesses to think about before they make a decision in terms of risk transfer or risk acceptance. Would be actually understand what it is we're talking about in terms of potential loss. And then it's much easier to decide, okay, how much do we then transfer to the insurance market, or do we retain it on our balance sheet as a known exposure? And then we're going to, put in additional controls and additional security to manage the risk, but also deal with the potential incident, essentially self-insure against that exposure.
Yeah, because we were sort of talking before, and I think we're both in agreement. This is the biggest risk to businesses nowadays, isn't it? And it's only going to become more dominant as more and more systems going online and more and more technology is used in business. So to not really understand it, or not really put enough energy into understanding where your risk lies and how much you're covered for, is going to come back to bite you at some point in the future, isn't it?
So I'd always reference, the stat from the National Cybersecurity Centre. So last year, I think it's just tipped over. It's 48, 49 for a long time. Last year, I think it was around 52% of SMEs had some sort of cyber incident.
Yeah.
So if you're going to boil this down into probabilities, the probabilities of having a cyber incident or a loss are 1 in 2.
Yeah.
So if you could put that against any other threat or exposure to your business that you might consider insurance against, if you said, okay, I'm going to drive a car and the chance of having a crash is 50%, you'd probably put a lot more value in your insurance policy than you might do otherwise. So think about the things that are going to really threaten your business over the next 12 months. Is it going to be fire, flood, or theft, or is it going to be probably something along the lines of either a cyber attack, a cyber loss, phishing, social engineering event resulting in crime, invoice manipulation, all those kind of things that the cyber policy can help with.
No, that makes perfect sense. And then to wrap up, so obviously Coalition don't work directly with end user businesses, is that right? But you work through brokers?
Correct, yeah.
So obviously we both partner with GWM Insurance. Yeah. They can help anyone who's listened to this who wants to look at your services. GWM can be the contact that they can kind of come through to you guys with.
Absolutely, yes. GWM, or speak to your broker. We work with lots of brokers across the country. Always go to them in the first instance. They can then help advise on things like what is your exposure, what's the right policy, making sure that you're getting the right contract for you.
Yeah, and to recap, the more security and standards you've got in place, the better your premium's going to be and the more cover you're going to have in the future.
Essentially, yes, we do absolutely reward good behaviour, and if we can see good things from the scan, and then that does feed into our underwriting model.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
Perfect. I think that's been really useful, and I hope obviously people listen to this have learned something. They're not too scared, and they'll go and actually look at what they've got or what they're getting, and make some sensible.
Perfect. Thanks for having me. Yeah.
Thank you for being a guest.
Cheers, Jamie.
That's all for this episode of the Tech Remedy podcast. I hope you found it insightful and have some useful takeaways for your business. Please don't forget to share the podcast with anybody else it may help, and subscribe for future episodes to come.